everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. Writer and performer on strike in Los Angeles, California. Still dragging on. The AMPTP absolutely refuses to sit down and negotiate. And so we wait till they grow the fuck up and come back to the negotiating table. But while we're waiting, great episode today. In fact, I think this might be one of my favorite episodes. This is Will Oldham. Been a fan of his since college, which I'm a middle-aged man, so you do the math. But if you don't know who Will is, I'm going to read you his bio right now. Originally from Louisville, Kentucky, Will Oldham was an actor before becoming a musician, appearing in John Sayles' Mate One as a teenager, as well as in films like Old Joy, Junebug, and The Guatemalan Handshake, as well as TV shows like Wonder Chosen. In the early 90s, he began playing music as Palace, or more accurately, as different permutations of the name Palace, but a few years later adopted the Bonnie Prince Billy moniker, which he's used ever since his 1999 album I See a Darkness. In the last 2+ decades, he's released almost 24 albums, some collaborations with artists like Bill Callahan and Matt Sweeney, and his latest, Keeping Secrets Will Destroy You, was just released in August on Drag City, and like everything else Will does, it's fantastic. Can't recommend it enough. I've been listening to it. I don't want to spill any secrets. I did get an advance copy, but so weeks before it was released, I've been listening to it, and it's just great. And Will's great. I really didn't know what to expect, and this, like I said before, this might be one of my favorite conversations. We really get into, I don't want to spoil it. I'll let you discover it as we talk. We get into a lot of stuff about Will's parents specifically, and it was super intriguing. By the way, if you are a first-time listener to Beginnings, what I like to do here in the intro is a little recommended if you like. If you listen to this and you like my talk with Will, well, you know what? I've been doing this for almost 14 years now, and, you know, that's a daunting back catalog, so, you know, why don't I recommend some for you, okay? You like this talk? Well, why not check out my interviews with, you know, how about people who Will has collaborated with, like Matt Sweeney from Chavez, okay? Or what about Matt's collaborator in Chavez, Clay Tarver? I talked to him. Or what about some film people or TV people? John Lee from Wonder Chosen has been on the show. That was in the first year or two. I don't know if it's how good it is, but I bet it's interesting at the very least. The director of the film Will was in The Guatemalan Handshake. Todd Rohal has been on the show. He's great. What about some other people that have released records on Drag City? Oren Ambarchi, Jimmy Flemian of The Frogs, David Grubbs. If you like those, why not subscribe to the show? Why not leave a review? Why not follow me on the hellscape that Twitter is, or on Instagram or Blue Sky, I suppose, at Andy Beckerman. Next week, episode 600. Very special episode. Very wonderful guest. Not going to announce it in advance, so stay tuned for that. But also, after that, Rod Argent, the founder of the Zombies. That was a cool talk. So look forward to those. But for now, let's talk to Will. I don't know, I'm not used to walking in the hot sun. I'm very like, my family, we get melanoma very easily. I'm very like Gollum-like. And so I'm like, you know, hiding from the sun most of the time. So this is a huge change, walking for hours out in front of Netflix or Paramount.
Oh my gosh. Have you been doing that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh. You just grab a sign, and there's no more, you can't write your own signs anymore. At the beginning, there was space. You could write your own signs. Now they're out of those, so you just have to grab whatever someone else wrote, and then walk around and sweat profusely.
Yeah,
I don't know. Well, I mean, I was thinking about when knew I was going to talk to you. I started thinking, because are you still SAG-AFTRA? Yeah. So you're on strike too.
Yeah.
And also, I was also thinking about this, because you were in Mate One. I'm a huge John Sayles fan.
Yeah.
And I think John Sayles was part of my early introduction into being politically conscious.
Uh-huh.
And I've been thinking about that a lot lately. And I also went during the civil rights remix in 2020. I was thinking about the art that made me politically conscious. And I talked to like Thurston Moore because I remember Sonic Youth doing that for me when I was a kid.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, is there certain art that for you had made you politically conscious?
I guess early on, well, I was fortunate to have the exposure to John Sayles and his ways of working and the people that he works with, and then the subject matter as well when I was 16. I don't know how much we can even, I got a memo saying I'm not allowed to do podcasts, but I called the office and say like, well, can I talk about, my bread and butter, which is music? And they're like, oh yeah, no problem. But listening to also a lot of Phil Oakes when I was a kid, I was kind of obsessive about Phil Oakes music, and that was a great way to learn about ways in which to be politically aware and to infuse one's work with that awareness whenever it's appropriate. It's a weird balance because there's not, unfortunately in the United States, in my lifetime and your lifetime, there's almost zero example of people making music, especially unless it's political music. It's not for popular consumption. There's a little bit more in the film business. There's your Aaron Brockoviches and Syrianas and things like that, Silkwood. But in music, it's almost non-existent, and it's a shame. I was thinking about it. I've been posting these. Do you look at my Instagram?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Yeah, most people don't. But it's. I've been posting, just because I'm not that much into social media or exposure of one's life to strangers, unless it's for work purposes. It's like, well, what should I do? I'm going to post. And I was just moving my compact disc collection from an old workspace to a new workspace. So what I've decided to do is post a CD every day and just write a couple of sentences about it. And what I am going to post tomorrow is this guy named Sam Gleaves, who's a kind of it's almost bluegrass. I mean, somebody who doesn't know bluegrass would say, you could just say, this is bluegrass, and they'd be fine with it. It's very trad. He's from southeastern United States. He plays banjo. It's more like a traditional music than a straight bluegrass. And he has a record. The title song of the record, Ain't We Brothers? And it's just this driving, great, beautiful song from the point of view of a guy who works in the mines who is gay. And it's up tempo. It's a story. There's emotion in it. There's no like tragedy really in it or anything like that. It's very empowering, and it works on all levels. Like it works if you were at a bluegrass festival and heard it, you'd just say, this is a great song. And there's a moment in the song where there's kind of the reveal of the situation that you're being, told about or sung about. And it's really empowering, just hearing this. He kind of breaks through this wall that you didn't realize exists in music, which is, I need to sing about this stuff. And the best way to do it is to sing about it in a great song, on a great record. The record isn't pushing anything specific except like, yeah, let's just get together kind of thing. And this just incredibly powerful song about a guy who just wants to live his life, as a coal miner and cohabitate with a man. And I wish there were more, why don't musicians feel like it's okay territory? And I think one reason is probably because in this period in American history, there's a lot of songwriters who have the privilege to create are not that passionate about anything because they're at the top of the heap. Like once you have the power to make records, to make music for a living, you're not really, in order to have that power and that access, there's not much you probably care about, because if you tried to create any sort of change, well, that change would take your power away from you. So let's just keep making breakup records,
Yeah. I've been writing about that a lot in the last couple of years. There's this Adam Curtis. Do you know him, the documentarian?
Yeah.
He's talking to basically like a kind of like the bourgeois constituency of the world. And I forget where he's on a podcast somewhere, and he's talking and he's saying like, well, here's the thing. If you want change, which is what you all seem to want, you're all saying we want change. We want things to be different. You have to be willing to gamble and realize that if things change, you might lose the power that you have and the privileges you have.
Yeah.
So if you really do want change, if you want, let's say you're liberal, you don't even want a socialist world. Like I'm a socialist. I want things to be completely worker owned. Okay. Let's pretend you don't even want that. You just want, things to be more equitable. You want, black people and queer people to have more rights, and you want banks to have less influence. In order to enact that change, you are going to have to really gamble and say, I might not be where I am now. And if you really want that, then you have to work towards it. And if you don't, you just have to sit there and complain on the internet for the rest of your life. Yeah. That's all that's open to you.
Yeah. And it's hard to know, because I am, I represent the top of the heap in many ways as a white male American Judeo-Christian straight person. And so this is my identity, and we're talking about embracing identity as well. And I know that with the change that will come eventually, whether it comes before we're all melted into, nothingness, I don't know, or drowned or whatever. But then my identity will be a different identity. It will represent something different. And I would like to think that that's even somebody that would be even more lovable, even more wonderful, like that this person who has been, taken down 1 to 100 rungs will be a better person than the person who just was born into a kind of a power that, without deserving it. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to believe that if my back is up against the wall, I will choose the right thing to do, and I will give up whatever small privileges. Again, I was raised pretty solidly middle class, so it's not like I didn't get to go to an Ivy League school. I didn't get to do a lot of things that other people got to do, that may have been born with, in a higher economic level than I was. But I've lived a nice life, and I would like to think that with the ethics that I have been instilled with, that I would do the right thing. But I don't know, because the more I'm seeing how things are, it really is about material. It's about material conditions. And so at the end of the day, I think I end up doing things to benefit my wife and myself and my friends.
Uh-huh.
And then use my spare time to do nice things like volunteer or do DSA work or things like that. But I don't let that work consume my life.
Yeah.
Is that ethically bad? I don't know. I don't know if that's ethically bad to not in this time period.
Yeah.
Well, this is the thing. This is what I talk about a lot on the show, is that I think you're a little older than me, but I think we were born in a time period where whatever your existential dreams were, you could follow those. And that there was a switch somewhere around, I say somewhere between 9/11 and the crash in 2008. Everything changed. And especially now with the climate disaster really upon us, we can't change those existential dreams. But the world has changed. And so we either have to change with it if we can, or just try to follow out what our actual desires are in this changed world. I don't know. It's very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I'm clinging to not the fact, the theory that I'm old enough that I can continue to cling to those existential dreams, and that is that is who I am. I am those dreams, and I'm old enough that it's not, they may not be fulfilled or fulfilling or rewarded or rewarding in the way that I had imagined, but they are what I know, and I think that they have value, but I do, yeah, I think that, like you said, that 9/11 is a significant time, of just sort of mass brainwashing and mass wiping away of even the ideal of trust, that's just saying like, no, trust is just, we don't, that's not a valid currency in the modern age. It is not a valid currency. And we have not changed since then, to just say you cannot trust anybody and we don't trust you.
Mm-mm. No.
But, and then, understanding, my dreams, include also continuing to do what I do and ideally get better at what I do, continue to get better with whatever resources I have at my disposal. And I mean, psychological and physical as well as I get older. But, and I think I don't know. I don't know if I will be able to do that. And then what do I tell? Yeah, what do I tell my child? But as I see that, it is not. People are not. It seems like as strongly associated with the identity that comes with, say, your job, a job-related identity, doesn't seem as realistic now as it even did when I was a kid. Yeah.
Yeah. So when did your earliest ambitions form, and was it acting that was that first ambition, or did you have something else that that kind of was your North Star, your existential North Star, let's say?
Yeah. I started being the things that I had access to as a small child, and this was hammered home to me recently because there was a play that my wife and I went to see about a week ago that was written by a new play, written by a guy who I had first seen when I was a child as an actor on stage here in Louisville. And so I looked up online to see if I could figure out what year that was. And it was 1981. He was in a production of The Three Musketeers. I was 11 years old. And I looked at the cast list for that. And all of the people in this cast, they were members of the company at the local repertory theater, which was weirdly in Louisville, Kentucky, was a leading repertory theater in the world, really, at that time, in the late 70s, early 80s. And they were my heroes. That's what that's the first thing. I saw them doing what they did, and that's what I wanted to do. But I was so young, of course, I didn't know what that was. All I knew was what they were doing, and I wanted to do that. When I would then started to do theater things, I realized like, oh, if I'm up on that stage, there's an audience in front of me. Immediately, it's less attractive. Like, I didn't want to do it because I wanted the audience there. I wanted to do it because I wanted to have these incredible words put in my mouth and to have these interaction with characters and to be given, new perspective on life every time the play starts over again, because you're entering this dynamic with these other characters, again, anew. And it's these were the things that were exciting to me, to think like, well, I know I can't in my life be a plumber and a pirate and a president and a priest and a leper, but as an actor, I can be all of those things. So it started to form there, and then I would try to associate it because I loved the movies when I was little as well, and I would go, to the library and check out piles of VHS. But usually, my favorite movies were movies that were at least 15 years old, if not 45 years old. And, again, thinking like, okay, these people are doing something that I want to do, not knowing what that was. I didn't know what it was to be on a set or preparing for a film role. It's not what it looks like, you know that. But a kid doesn't know that. A kid thinks like, oh, if you're watching somebody, Anthony Hopkins driving a motorcycle across the United States, you think, well, that's Anthony Hopkins driving a motorcycle across the states. And it's not. It's Anthony Hopkins for 20 seconds at a time getting out of his trailer and walking up and doing a shot and then getting back in his trailer. That's his life. And internally, he may, and he probably does because he's an insanely brilliant actor, be able to pull all of that and keep it living inside of him while he's inhabiting a character over the course of a couple of months. But that's, definitely that was outside of my concept of what acting could potentially be. And it would take years and years for me to, I understood from an early age that I was not going to be the actor that I wanted to be because I didn't have the experience. I wasn't a complicated enough human being with enough having gone on that I could then translate that into a performance of any value. So it would take years, but I didn't realize like, we don't know what we don't know, obviously. And later I learned like, well, to be a really strong actor, you do need to have access to complex human relationship, and you need to know what it is actually the nuts and bolts of being an actor, which is being able to remain connected to that character, even though 98% of your time during the course of a film shoot is not quote unquote working. It's not working in front of the camera. The work is all this other stuff that you can't imagine when you're 10, 11, 12, 15, 16 years old. Yeah. So I was imagining this life that I feel like I have more now than I would have if I had gone into acting more fully, because I can step in and out of these songs, and each song I can be kind of exploring things from places that I shouldn't, that most people don't have access to, being able to step to this position to, or that position to look at the world and comment on the world and be buffeted by the world.
Yeah. When you were younger, was that impulse some kind of indecision? Like, there's all these possibilities in front of me and I don't know what I really want to do, but acting allows me to investigate them? Or was it curiosity? There's all these things, I don't want to be them, but there is a way to explore them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it was between them. I think it was kind of like a Studs Terkel frame of mind where I still have kind of a curiosity that's unvanquishable. And, if I'm sitting on the plane next to somebody, unless I'm just desperately tired or something, I'll try to find out everything about that person. And knowing that, as a kid, even thinking that, having an understanding that, mm-hmm. It's convenient for us to put certain, shared public figures on these pedestals and say, oh, that's a master. But I knew, like, even knowing that I was seeing these actors on the stage here in Louisville, and I knew how great they were, and I knew I could have a conversation, say, with you about Meryl Streep or Marlon Brando or Denzel Washington. I couldn't talk to you about these other people. Does that mean that they're lesser? No, I knew it wasn't. They were my heroes. They were huge and they were amazing actors. So I realized that translated to everything, that everywhere you go, like, that the masters are everywhere. The masters are in every field or in no field as well. Just people who are masters at living life and understanding life are just everywhere. And so it was just thinking like, well, gosh, I I basically just want to hang around the masters. That's what I want to do. I don't, whatever they are, I want to gain access to be around these people who are the great teachers.
That epiphany you had when you were, I'm calling it epiphany.
Yeah.
If that's wrong, you can tell me. But like when you were saying that, like, oh, I don't have the experience in complex emotions or complex human relationships yet. Was that something that you actually, like, a conscious thought you had at that time, or is it something later that you're reconstructing, saying like, oh, I knew, like, maybe I knew kind of like unconsciously in the back of my head or something, like maybe I'm not there yet, or was it really like you were that self-aware then?
I think I was that self-aware. I knew I couldn't be specific about it, but I knew what I wanted to do. And I knew that I was, I didn't have the authority yet to do anything that I want. I was nowhere near being a master, basically. The only thing I could arguably be a master at is being this specific individual, and so trying to know the most about that and to, which is nothing, So I would go to auditions and think like, well, I can't sell myself because I don't know who I am. And I don't know that, I know that most likely I'm not the ideal person for any of these parts that, that I'm trying out for, because I don't know, I just don't know enough. I'm not experienced enough. I'm not smart enough to give the performance that I would want to give. And, there was, on some levels there was a frustration, also seeing how rare it was for someone in the film world to get to a place where they could have become as good as they could possibly be. It's really hard, probably in any field, but to have the opportunity to do the kind of work that you could then look back when you're in your 60s or 70s and say, I was allowed to do hard work, so, to the point where it became good work. And how nearly impossible that was, especially without a certain amount of self-centeredness and or disdain and or competitiveness that are, for better or for worse, not really a part of my character.
Yeah. I mean, that's it's baffling to me to be that self-aware. When I was that age, I was very observant. I was an outsider. I was a Jew in a very Christian area. So I was an outsider.
Yeah.
And so I was observant about everything else, but not about myself. And it was only later in life, like going through therapy and things like that, where I was finally like able to turn that observant part inside out. And I'm very curious, like, is this just like, this was a quirk about your psychology, about your brain chemistry and architecture? Are your parents self-aware people when you were growing up? Like, how did this feature, how was it cultivated when you were younger?
Yeah. And there was a time when I first started making records for Drag City, say in the mid 90s, I remember having a conversation or two with different people involved with Drag City, whether it's Dan Koretsky, who's, one of the owner operators of the label, or David Berman, or, Bill Callahan, or having conversation about, well, what is it? Because at the time on Drag City, there might be Red Crayola, King Kong, Smog, Royal Trucks, and Pavement had been on it, so well, what's the common thing that binds these things together? And one thing that came up, which is, I remember there's a great book by a writer named Hugh Nissenson. I think it might be called Song of the Earth, where it takes place in the future, and it's about genetically and behaviorally engineering citizens. And in this case, there's a particular person that they're trying to experiment, like they're trying to create an artist. And so they create an artist by doing things like depriving him of the connection made with the mother during breastfeeding for 6 months out of his first year, so that there's this deprivation, but it's true, there are some common threads among certain kinds of expressive artists that include, some commonalities, developmental commonalities, right? So and we talked about illnesses, who had illnesses or who was for whatever reason isolated, and so there was a degree of isolation, I think, in my childhood. And then my mom, although she was just beginning it when I was around 10 or so, began kind of a deep exploration of her identity artistically. So, but it was always behind closed doors. She pursued all of these forms of expression and got really deep into them, but it wasn't, she never had anybody over to look at what she was making. It was like for herself, sometimes for an art teacher if she was taking a class, but it was deep and intense and emotionally and psychologically disruptive on subtle levels, because it was around the house, and we were seeing like these explorations, and my mom would show us these things. She'd show us these drawings that were about 17 by 24 or whatever a standard sketchbook was, and she would, in magic marker, draw her dreams every day. And dreams can be very intense, and she's like drawing very explicitly these dreams in a very beautiful way, but it's, you're seeing like, oh, this is my mom, this is what she's doing. And then as well, we did have, Louisville, Kentucky had an incredibly strong and vital art scene in the 70s and 80s, which included the underground music scene, which I think benefited as a trickle down from our parents' generation of experiencing something that had civic support, because the ballet was strong, the theater was strong, the orchestra was strong. And these were things that the city put lots of money into, and the wealthy people in Louisville put a lot of money into it. So all these kids were like, oh, the arts are important, music is important, as a given from a certain age. So we're exploring. I grew, I aged into already a scene that was happening musically of people who were really, really intelligently exploring the possibilities of musical expression. And, then starting to get into records to supplement that. Well, if this almost gets me to this place, maybe this record could push me that much farther into this way of thinking or this way of feeling. And that was, and then we had this theater. It was obviously pushing all my buttons in the right way. And so I started, taking intensive theater training classes. And again, that's just like, in addition to regular school, I'm shoving ideas, all of my spare time is like either at the theater, shoving those ideas into my brain. And as soon as that's done, going into the basements of my friend's house for their band practices and shoving that stuff into my brain. And then, so at the same time with this developmental stuff, I realized as an adult through this weird, I would be a good test subject for developmental psychologists, because my parents were decent folks, non-alcoholics, non-abusive, anything like that. We lived in the same house from when I was 6 months old. And then eventually my mom sold the house when I was 36 years old, or 37. So all this stability. However, like I went to a nursery school up the street here, and then my folks thought, oh, you should go to this other kindergarten because you have some friends there. They didn't take into consideration that all my friends were a year older, and so they were gone by the time they moved me to this school. And then they said, well, now you're going to go to your local public school. We can walk there for first grade. Great. Went there, and and I did academically well. So they tested me for the accelerated, what they called it, the advanced program in our school system.
Yeah.
And I got into the advanced program. My school didn't offer the advanced program, so I was districted, sent to another school. However, that school was full, so they sent me to a school kind of far away, on the school bus. And then the following year for third grade, and also everyone's like, oh, you're going to love it. This teacher is amazing. So the teacher gets pregnant 2 months into the school year and then is on maternity leave for the rest of the time. And we have a fair to middling substitute teacher. The next year, there's room in my local school that does have the advanced program. So they send me there. Don't worry, it's incredible teacher, brilliant, charismatic, loves to teach. 2 months in, she gets pregnant, leaves, and there's a fair to middling substitute teacher. Then I get bused. So I'm at another school, far away with completely. So I never had I had, you know, then I was in the same school for 2 years and then switched schools for sixth grade and stayed. But by that point, my whole concept of what a friend was or what a friend community of friends was just didn't exist. I could see it from a distance, but they all knew each other. Every school I went to, they all knew each other. And but it was weird because at home was stable and supportive, right? So that I think was huge in terms of just making my, internal life a little more vibrant, and something that I depended on than many of my peers, because they got satisfied by relationships with their friends. And for me, it was just like I observed relationships with other people. And it took me years as an adult to even realize oh, I've been friends with this person for 2.5 years, and I didn't realize that I qualified because I didn't know what a friendship was. I just thought that they were continuing to be nice to me for the past 2.5 years because I never had my friends weren't, I was always watching these friendships where they're all hanging out over there. And can I come over? Can I do this with you? That kind of thing. Yeah.
That's so fascinating. My theory on the show is really more that it's not linear. People don't do X when they're young and then that leads to Y as an adult. But there are all these different little things that buffet you in different directions and they push you slightly in different ways, right? Or I think sometimes when I'm writing a character, I think of their personality as faders on a mixing board. And then
nice.
Depending on how the context changes, the faders move but there's always some kind of baseline for people usually, unless they're, psychopaths or something like that. But the two generalizations that I can make after doing this show for so long, and it's anecdotal, so don't put a lot of scientific faith behind this, is that disruptions are a big thing and outsider status, being othered in some way, are big things that push people in whatever, whether it pushes them interior. I don't know. I don't like I don't like drawing too many conclusions. I just like having those generalizations there in the background. But that's a way. I don't think I've ever really heard that story before in that exact way. But that instantiates that kind of disruptions thing and also kind of outsider status thing all in one.
And it's cool that you're wearing the Silver Juice t-shirt, and because I got to just record the Ramones Outsider, which was one of my favorite songs when I was a kid. Ramones were a huge band for me, and Outsider was a huge song, and got to record that with David Berman, and we put it out last summer, I think, as a single.
Because
I've always, I was just Outsider, of course, and not outsider like the Outsiders. They had too many friends, the Matt Dillon movie, they I don't understand that kind of. I'd kill to be that kind of outsider, where you get to hang out with your friends. Yeah.
Was when your mom took up art when you were about 10, was that some ambition of hers that she had put down for motherhood or for an occupation or something like that, and then picked up? Was it something that just when you were 10, she's there's some yearning in me? Was it I don't know, Reagan becoming president?
Yeah.
If I had the timeline right in my head.
It's interesting because she comes from, as far as I can tell, I love my mom's family. But there's not, it's not an artistic family in that way. But she had a strange, she would, her parents met in the military. Her mom was from Texas. Her dad was from Louisville, Kentucky. They married her, and her mom was from a terrible family with lots of neglect and abuse. So they moved, working for the Army, to Hawaii. Her dad was in California, I think, planning some sort of Pacific mission when Pearl Harbor happened, and my grandmother was a nurse and she was pregnant with my mom, so she's like on her hands and knees mopping up blood with my mom inside of her in, December of 1941. My mom, then they're moving around a lot. Then my mom's dad dies in a plane crash in 1948 when my mom is 6 years old. My grandmother, having the terrible, like non-existent family in San Antonio, Texas, moves to Kentucky to live with her in-laws. They have one other kid. So then my mom's so then she remarries. My mom has to, understand like Louisville, Kentucky, and this new dad starts having, half siblings. Her one full brother, when my mom was about late 20s, gets hit on a motorcycle and dies. Then her youngest brother, I think, half brother, gets hit walking down the street by a car and he dies. And so I think these things, and then my mom being, born in May of 42, like is one of these millions and millions of women who are actively coming to terms with, what it is to be a woman in modern Western society and how it kind of sucks in a lot of ways. And she's realizing that she has a lot of emotional baggage that has not been dealt with. And she's not really, like, she was a teacher and then she started having kids and quit teaching and was raising the kids. But I think just trying to understand, like, wait a minute, why did I go to college? Why did I, have these relationships? What do I have? And maybe because Louisville did place an apparent value on artistic expression. Maybe that's when, and she just, I feel like she began in the late 70s when I was 7, 8, 9, and just got kind of deeper and deeper. And then finally, and she did, ceramics for years, drawing for years, collage for years, different kinds of drawing. And then the last thing she did really was she pursued a graduate degree in creative nonfiction so that she could tell her story, but in writing. And just like literally like within a year of getting that graduate degree, her husband, my dad, dies at age 63, completely, randomly, prematurely, surprised. And she begins at that point to demonstrate symptoms of encroaching early onset dementia, Alzheimer's. And that was in 2006. So she had these productive years from like 1980 to 2006, like 25 years. And she was relentless and used it as a tool. She was using it as a tool nonstop also, which I think was an interesting lesson for me because, it took me a while to, and I'm still trying to learn, like to what extent is self-expression a part of what we should be involved with? Because we're working, I consider my boss to be the audience. The audience is my boss. They pay me. I don't get advances or anything like that. I get paid when someone comes to a show or somebody buys a record. And so they're my boss. So I think like, well, does my boss want to hear me bitch and moan? Or does my boss want to, be relieved from his or her own burdens? Or, does my boss want the vicarious pleasure or purging that artistic expression can allow? But what I grew up seeing was my mom trying to get better and better and better at presenting her ideas and exploring her painful past through all these different, and it was scary work also, like if you see, like you can, I See a Darkness is her skull. And she had made that with a degraded image of herself as a baby, like sitting in the middle of the skull. And I said, Mom, would you make one of these skulls for me? And then, she's like, yeah, I'll take myself out of it and I'll make that skull for you. But her art was always, heavy, powerful, and beautiful at the same time, and she tried to polish it and make it great, but she never, I think I included her in a group show that I was asked to curate, a novelty curator, a musician at a great gallery in Philadelphia. And then the Family Bookstore, the Family Bookstore on Fairfax. So that was co-founded by a friend of mine, Sammy Harcum, who
Yeah.
has done a lot of illustrations in various Bonnie Prince Billy records.
Yeah, he's great.
And my mom's art has been in there too, including like both of them together in I See a Darkness, and Master and Everyone and Ease Down the Road. They're both in those. But he at Family, they did a group show in maybe 2007 or 2008 that she was included in. But those are like the shows, maybe two shows that my mom has ever been a part of, in her entire life when she was alive. And she didn't seem necessarily interested in it. She was a driven artist, but never said like, oh, I'd like to show this to somebody. I never heard her say she'd like to show it to anybody ever, much less sell it or, have any sort of relationship to the arts business.
Wow. When you were 10 and she started doing this, well, let me ask this, I guess. Was she emotionally expressive when you were younger, or was your first insight into her psyche when she started making art?
There were definitely things that were coming out in the art that she didn't talk about. I think every once in a while she would, and then there was evidence of pain. She had pain, and would hide away sometimes and eventually and did lots of therapy. She did lots of therapy and eventually, availed herself of the new antidepressant medications and experimented with those off and on for a number of years. But she wouldn't, she didn't. It's interesting looking at the dream illustrations now and thinking like she was okay with us looking at these things when I'm 10. My older brother's 2 years older, my younger brother's 4 years younger. These were not hidden away, but they're fairly graphic. And there's emotion being presented in these dream illustrations. And so was she showing us? Was she saying, this is this, and this is, I had this dream where this happened, and I don't know. It was she was proud of all of her work for sure, but it seemed like the only people she really wanted to see it maybe were her family.
That's interesting. I asked it because I come from a loving family, but a pretty repressed family. And even in adulthood, they have not been through therapy. I have, and still do therapy. And it's difficult where I'm like, I can express myself now in a way I couldn't when I was younger. And there's this gap, and I'm still trying to figure out how to emotionally connect with them, like in a deeper way, or whether that is a thing that I even want. Should we do this or not? And I'm just trying to imagine like what if I could get that insight into my parents' emotional life when I was 10. I don't know how I would have reacted. I'm like really trying to think through it.
Yeah.
Because it seems like it's I don't know how fast that she decided to like go from not making art to making art, and at what depth she gets to, like how quickly is that process. But like I have to imagine it would be jarring, but that's me coming from a repressed family, so I don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, I know, like, I think my father was happy to not explore most, emotional terrain. He was a good person, he was a very moral person, a good person, but he was also, kind of workaholic-y and wasn't, he wasn't ever out at the bar, but he was either like at work or like running. He liked to run, so there wasn't a lot of active discussion of these things, as my mom would sort of learn or remember different things or realize different things about, oh, my father, when I was 6, died in a plane crash in which his body was burned beyond recognition. So that's not like a sentence. That's the beginning of the rest of my life, and trying to understand like, okay, and it's okay for that to be the beginning of the rest of your life. It's not like he died, now move on. It's just like, you can't, that's all of a sudden, that is your life as well. Everything that happens to you is your life. It's not like, it happens to you and then goes away. Nothing goes away. Once it happens to you, it's part of you. Yeah. And so she was learning, these were big things. These are big things that make me who I am, and how can I get it out even, maybe if I need to get it out, maybe that would make me happier to get it out. I'm just, and I'm guessing that I know she just worked intensely on herself. I have trunks of journals of hers that I have not even broken into.
Do you think you're emotionally prepared to?
I don't know. I mean, because she was kind of creating her own syllabus for self-exploration, I think, there'd be a lot of things that would be just, going through the weeds and not necessarily very interesting or productive. At the same time, she tried to do it. She was involved with like spiritual, theological discussion groups. And she may have even, she got so into some of them that I think she even spoke at certain kind of Jungian gatherings. Yeah.
Wow. No. I mean, I'm very curious about this stuff because this, she goes not only does she deal with a lot of trauma in her personal life, but she's also living at a time, like you said, where there's a huge cultural shift and especially like existential shift in terms of identity, right? The 60s like refocuses. She, I don't know what she believed before that, but like maybe she believed I'm only supposed to be a housewife. And then suddenly the second wave feminist movement barrels through America and changes everyone's conception.
Yeah.
And you are born into this. I think there's a Heidegger term called thrownness that I really love because that's what it feels like. You're thrown into a situation, like whatever the world was before you were born, you're now thrown into it. Right. And this is the kind of just the soup, terrible metaphor, but the soup you are placed into, I guess, if I'm going to follow the metaphor out.
Yeah. And for some reason, my, folks did choose to be like, they were involved with things, but then they were also, they chose to be outsiders in a lot of, even like we lived on this weird little dead end street that happened to be just like literally the kids who lived in the house, our backyard fence, the kids behind us could get cable. We couldn't get cable because our street wasn't like officially in the bounds of who could get cable. So, and my folks were, they were fine with that. Of course, we were like, what? Why can't we get cable? And it's just cable TV. Can we get MTV? And we have to jump the fence of our neighbors and go to our neighbor's house to watch MTV. But why did they make?
Yeah. How can I watch Different Strokes without cable?
Oh, we could watch Different Strokes because when I was a kid, it was actually on TV. It was on like once a week, and I watched it, I think, religiously. But yeah, they were thrown into things. We were thrown into things, and what is my daughter being thrown into? And it's and I feel not only okay with talking about some of this, but interested in it because it's great talking to you about some of understanding my relationship to my work through my mom's relationship to her work, which I think was a big, like living with an artist was a big deal. Yeah. My poor daughter.
Are there certain things you can see in your own creative life that mirror your mom's? Or let me say this, even if not mirror, like are some kind of reaction to, and it could be a purposeful, like she did it like this, and I'm gonna write music like this, or I'm gonna look at the craft of acting in this way, or it doesn't have to be conscious or unconscious, right? I'm wondering, like, in what way did that work as this kind of like thing that happened in your youth?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I think. She didn't necessarily, I've always felt compelled for a variety of reasons to have this relationship with the audience, including financial, which my mom, because my dad supported her, that was part of the, if he had died then, or if, something else had happened and she was on her own, would she try? It wouldn't surprise me if that would have pushed her to seeing if there was a financially viable way of pursuing her art. But she was introverted, and I am fairly introverted, but then I had this understanding sort of drilled into me of the value of human relationship because I didn't have it. And so, so for me, the audience is the two main things is one is it allows me to make a living, but the other is to send like these communication signals to people, ideally to receive some back, but knowing that some people are, you know, they don't know, you know, we don't know what's missing. You know we feel like things that are missing. And so the attempt is to create this bridges of communication to people who don't feel spoken to, right? Because I know what that feels like, and I know how the world changes. Everything changes through intimate connection with another person. Everything, you know, everything changes. Like colors become different. Everything is different. And so it's like, well, you know, you want to load the work up as much as possible so that it's not alienating, and it is, you know, so that it does draw somebody in and help, you know, and ideally allow them to feel like, oh, this is a place where I feel capable and I feel empowered and I feel recognized, you know, and I'm not going to be necessarily, I love it whenever it is viable, but you know, I still am this white male American dude. So, but at the same time, I know, you know, that's one thing I love about listening to the Sam Gleaves song, Ain't We Brothers, is like the sense of release and catharsis that I get in hearing this song when there's like this demand / plea for, I just want to be able to love who I want to love. And I feel, you know, cleansed and empowered at that moment in the song, even though I don't share that specific, you know, issue that is a huge and unbearable problem. I don't have that, but I do have issues that are unbearable problems, and I understand Sam's musical language, or his ability to convey this thing musically, and think, you know, I sometimes when we were involved with something, and I don't know if you experience this like with writing, but there is this whole different level of meeting that comes with the process itself. And so you can see like, oh, that person was able to, at this point in this scene, turn the emotion around. And it could be, you know, someone would be like, yeah, but that scene is about a garbage disposal not working. Be like, oh yeah, I guess so. Well, that's not what I'm paying attention to. I'm paying attention to the victory I know that writer felt when they were able to turn the scene around at that moment. They pivoted the whole thing. So I guess it is about a garbage disposal, but it isn't. It's about the pivot. It's about the switch that happens in that moment.
Yeah.
And why you might have, you know, for me, it's hard to recommend music or even films to people. And you may have, because it's just like, I can't, you know, if I'm fully fulfilled by something, there's so much involved with me observing process, and I can't separate, you know, someone can, I know that most of my favorite movies or records are things that it would just be, I shouldn't waste any time trying to tell you to listen to my favorite record, because you would listen to it and just be like, it just sounds like a bunch of garbled nonsense or something like that. And I'll realize, yes, it does. You're right. But that's not what I'm hearing. I'm hearing this other thing happening.
Oh yeah. That's the loneliest feeling in the world.
Well, it can be lonely, but then you realize, well, I'm connected to that person and this piece of work, and that's massive. It's so huge.
That part's great. Yeah. I meant like when there's something that means so much to you, and then you like, oh, you got to listen to this, or you got to watch this, and then they're like, yeah, that was fine, and you're like, oh, this is.
Well, then you realize that your job though is to translate that. Like you realize, like, oh, well, now that's cool, because now now the challenge is in front of me, because I get so much from this piece of work. I want this person to get the same thing. They can't. So I now have to work towards creating something, or, you know, funneling something in their direction so that they can achieve the same sense of revelation that I had, but they're not going to get it from that piece of work. So that's cool. You now have, you know, it's like I'm uniquely positioned to translate this thing.
Yes. Okay. Last thing. Okay. And I don't know if there's any significance in this, but I'll throw it out there. Maybe there is. It's interesting. Your mother's journey as an artist, you know, it kind of just like discovering the self through her art and not feeling the need to, or not, I don't know if it's not feeling the need to connect with others through it, or just like if it was fear of whatever, I don't know. But I'm saying like there's something interesting about that paralleling the 70s movement and into the 80s of that kind of self-exploration that happens in culture, and then you coming out of that is like, well, no, we need to connect with others, or there is some kind of like there is some deeper emotional or something, I don't know how you want to exactly describe it, thing that comes out of it being in a public work.
Yeah it's I mean, I think I did, by seeing somebody pursuing artistically expressive work and getting somewhere with it, seeing, like, being moved by the work was pretty huge, just seeing, like, oh, well, she's getting back into it again and again, and it's kind of getting better and better, and it's sort of serving a purpose, but then also realizing maybe that the closed circle might be the one thing that kept it from within her lifetime serving the purpose that she was imagining that it could. And thinking, like, well, creating something, a necessary step in that is sharing, for, not for everybody, but to me, I feel that way, that in creating something, a necessary step is then including somebody else in the creation. Does that answer that question, kind of?
I think
okay.
Look, there's no real answers on the show. I just it's prompts and whatever that prompt brings up in your brain. But Will, thank you so much for joining me. This was so lovely to talk to you.
I'm trying to think if there's anything in this room. No, there's none of her work in this room, but yeah, I have a lot of her work, and it's just like, that's cool. But thanks, man. That was that was great.
Yeah. I mean, I've been a fan for decades now, so thank you.
Thank you. And good luck with the writers' strike. I mean, I have one of my best friends is a writer, and he said that he sees, like, that part of the implicit goal is to, gut the WGA.
Yep. But on the other side of it,
be like a weird, like, social club in 5 to 10 years where
that's why we can't lose. That's why I think the good thing that's coming out of this is I've never seen this level of solidarity among my community here in Los Angeles, and just the kind of, like, energy and joyousness. As hot and sweaty as the picket lines are, there's an energy that I haven't felt since, starting to do comedy at, like, UCB in New York, like that kind of, like, camaraderie, or like the Pittsburgh, when I was in a band in the Pittsburgh music scene, like that kind, there's like a feeling here that I haven't felt before. So I think that's a positive.
These things that you describe, like, I've had those experiences, and those are definitely, like, those are driving forces. Like, the pursuit of solidarity is a huge motivator.
Yeah.
I wish it was for everybody.
Yes. Yeah. All right. Well, all right. I'll let you get back to your day. Thank you again for joining me.
Back at you. Thanks for having me. Peace.
And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, oh, 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 bye.